Today, Daniel is going to walk us through and help us better understand the prayer of examen. So the first thing that I wanted to do, since this week we were focusing on Elijah and we had read through 1 Kings chapter 17 through 19, Daniel, what I really want to ask is, why did you choose this spiritual practice? What does the prayer of examen have to do with the story we read of Elijah?
Well, that's a great question, right? So, first of all, prayer is the primary component. That was one of the main spiritual practices that I think Elijah was literally practicing when he was sort of encountering the angel, having that interface, that's a conversation with God. And so that's prayer. So, I mean, first off, that's why we wanted to focus on the spiritual practice just generally of prayer. But I think one could argue, and obviously you could argue all kinds of ways, but one could argue that he was in essence sort of examining his relationship with God and certainly with that angel as he had that dialogue. And that's why I thought, gosh, this might be a good way to just do the prayer of examen, because there are all kinds of ways to pray. And this is just one of them. And so part of what I wanted to own was just, man, let's try to figure out ways to engage prayer. Let's try to recognize the power of prayer, and that quite simply, it's just a way to converse with God. So that's why I kind of landed here.
Okay, and before we met this morning, you asked me to download Reimagining the Examen, the app, and this is what the icon looks like.
Yeah.
So I hope that anyone who's joining us right now will take a moment to download that app. It's available on iPhone and Android because Daniel's going to use that tool to walk us through this.
Yeah, so you can do the prayer of examen either literally just in a format that I'm about to describe, or you can use this on your phone, because obviously that makes it readily available. It makes it easy to use, and the app is a little more expansive than what I would call the traditional prayer of examen. And so let me sort of quickly walk through the prayer of examen just at what I call a high level, and then we can talk about the app itself, right? So prayer of examen was developed, it's believed, by St. Ignatius of Loyola, who lived, about 400 years ago. And it was a way, he believed, to, again, encounter God, develop a relationship with God. And it's a specific kind of prayer or form of prayer, right? Part of what we acknowledge is all prayer is good. Any way you do it, whenever, wherever, however you do it, is great. And we just want to encourage that. This is just one way. So there are basically 4 stages or steps to the examen, and they're fairly easy to just remember. So I'm just going to quickly walk us through those. The first is to just give thanks, just acknowledge that you're grateful for whatever has happened that day. So if you're praying at the end of the day, you would reflect on, what you've been through. If you're praying at the beginning of the day, you'd still kind of just reflect on the previous day. You give thanks, then you review the day. You just kind of walk yourself through it. What did I do well? What did I get wrong? How was God a part of my day? You just kind of review it and acknowledge God's presence. That's the second stage. Then the third stage is to face your shortcomings. And that's quite literally just confession. That's an acknowledgement. Where did I fall short? What did I do that wasn't as God would have wanted? What did I do where I kind of fell short of what I know I should have done, right? So face your shortcomings. And again, that's just a confession. And then the fourth stage of the examen is sort of an acknowledgement of, golly, what could I do better tomorrow? Or if you're praying in the morning, what now can I do better today? And sort of ask God, give me some strength, or give me some encouragement, or sort of guide me. What would help me do better this day? So it's give thanks, reflect, face shortcomings, and then kind of look for better the next day if you're praying in the evening, or the day that's ahead if you're praying in the morning. Those are the basic steps of the examen. And that is, so if you can be guided by those, that'll kind of guide your prayer life each time you do it. And originally, Ignatius thought this is a good thing to do midday, and then to do it again at the end of the day. That was his original concept. But you can do it in the morning, midday, evening, whenever you want. But it's basically a great way to engage an intentional relationship with God. Now, that's if you're doing it without the app. If you're doing it with the app, I'm just going to call up the app. So when you call up the app, where's my camera? It'll say something like this: today's Examen. And what's really cool, if you notice down up in the top left-hand corner, there's a hamburger menu there. And when you pull up the hamburger menu, there are lots of options for what ways you can, if you've got a specific thing you want to be focused on. And I think there's roughly 30 of these. And what's cool is you can just pick on any one of those. And so I'm just going to pick on, am I free or unfree? I think it's the second one. Well, it's not pulling up for you. My phone's being wacky. Hold on. Will you pull that up for me? Am I free or unfree?
Yes, I'm pulling that up.
My phone is being wacky.
And so it looks like this. When I went into the menu, it has a list of all of the examens. And so I selected, am I free or unfree?
Yeah.
And in there, when it takes me to it, the way that I get started is by swiping the screen to the left.
Right. And so the beauty of this app is, again, you've got 30. So quite literally, you can go a month at a time, right? You could have each of the examens one day out of the month and then just start them over again. If I think that's their philosophy. So you chose, am I free or not? And so this is a way to examine whether I have freedom in Christ and whether I'm following in a way with God, or am I being encumbered or held bondage, if you will, to other stuff, whether it's my work or whether it's obligations or guilt or whatever. And so as Alyssa pointed out, you swipe to the left. And what's unique about this examen is there are more than 4 stages on any of these examens. There's anywhere from 6 or 7 to as many as 10 or 11, depending on which one you've done. So as you swipe to the left, it literally walks you through something to do. So in this case, I still can't get to that particular one. And the very one I chose, it won't let me open. So,
well, it's okay. One of the things that I like is the very first screen that you swipe to is an introduction, and it kind of sets your mind. And so, am I free or unfree? The introduction starts with, we are spiritually free when our spiritual and emotional state of being is healthy, when we are desirous of being faithful, hopeful, and loving people. We are spiritually unfree when our negative emotions and temptations have gotten the better of us, when we are too angry, sad, tempted, or scared to think straight. So I guess it kind of explains the idea behind this prayer before we get into it.
Exactly. And so that's helpful. And each one of those will do that. It'll give you a brief introduction to kind of set you on the specific path. Then you go to the next one. And this is the very first stage of Examen, is sort of stepping into the presence. So it says, I ask God to make his presence known to me in this moment. I place my hands, palms up, in the gesture of receptivity. So I'm going to put my hands, both of them up, and I'm just going to be in a posture, if you will, of receiving, right? Then you swipe again to the left, and it says, I spend a few moments in gratitude. So here's the giving thanks, thanking God for 1 or 2 of the blessings, big and small, that I've received today. And so you just name those. That's what you would do is, God, I'm thankful that I had time with my family. God, I'm thankful that it was a beautiful day, if that were the case. God, I'm thankful that I got to have an interaction with somebody today that was helpful, right? Anything that you're grateful for. Then the third one, as you swipe again to the left, says, I look back and I ask, what was my most unfree moment today? And that's when you just reflect, right? And again, going back to the introduction, it kind of described what freedom was or lack of freedom. And so you reflect back on that. And that's a part of acknowledging the review of the day. Where did I get it right? Where did I get it wrong? Right? And it goes into
And one of the things that I find really interesting and looking for your most unfree moment for me is usually the moments that I am actually trying to take control to regain my freedom. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I lose it completely because I am at the mercy of my personality.
Yeah. Well, there you go. See, and this is why the examine prayer is really helpful, because it both keeps us connected with God and it reflects on our own behaviors, attitudes, and actions. Right. So I love the way this particular screen continues down towards the bottom. It says, "In my imagination, I return to that specific moment in my day." So just as for instance, when you kind of describe that, right, when your most unfree moment, I imagine God and myself watching this moment together, side by side. God and I watch as my heart fills to the brim with the negative emotion that swept me away. And that's often what happens when we are unfree, right? We feel very bad, we feel very negative, we feel very unsavory, for instance, whatever. I mean, you just name, and it's not good. And so part of what the examine does is take you to that place. And that's not exactly a place most of us want to go, right? We'd rather be, number one, free, but we'd rather be away from that moment. But this takes you into it first so that you can then move away from it. Okay, then you swipe again, and this next stage, I won't go through the whole thing, but just says, I speak to God about what I see and ask for forgiveness. So this is that facing the shortcoming. This is a sense in which I acknowledge, man, I was too controlling, or I was too captivated by this thing, and I seek forgiveness for that. And notice this can get really specific. I mean, many of us would be guilty, myself too, of being very generic in our confession, right? God, I'm sorry I wasn't, the best I could have been, or God, I'm sorry for my pride today, or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this gets us really specific and takes you right there. And it even, again, talks about emotion. The other thing with regard to the examine prayer is it allows for open emotion. And I think in many ways, it's a kind of spiritual therapy that really takes us deeper in a relationship with God. And again, Elijah was doing that very thing. Remember, he went through that litany of, oh my gosh, the Israelites have done this, and they've abandoned you, and they've worshiped other gods, and I tried to take my stand, and I'm the only one left, and they're trying to take me now too, right? I mean, that's what Elijah was doing. He was owning all that stuff. You swipe again to the left. I'm going to invite you to say something here, Alyssa. Why don't you read 5?
Well, before we go to 5, I just have the question, because this is my first time in this app for Reimagining the Examen. And so you mentioned at the beginning that the traditional examen has 4 steps. And obviously this app has more than 4 steps, but it looks like the first 4 steps in this app were the traditional steps. So is the idea that I could go into any of these prayers, and if I only had time to do the first 4 steps, I've done the prayer of examen and the rest of it is just a deeper look?
Well, yes and no. So, this is just one example. So it's just kind of extrapolating it out to a further degree, whereas some of them will take 1, 2, or even 3 screens to get through the gratitude, or 1, 2, or 3 screens to get through the facing of the shortcomings. They kind of just, so it really is still the same 4 segments. It's just kind of expanded, I guess, for lack of a better word. And the other thing with regard to the examen is, I mean, like many prayers, the examen can be done in a matter of 5 minutes or 50 minutes. It's really up to you as to how extensive you want to make it. And so, and there's no right or wrong way. Again, it's a way to do it. And so if you want to make it short, you can make it short. Or if you want to make it really expansive, you can do that.
Well, okay. So step 5 in today's examen says, looking back again, I ask, what was my most spiritually free moment today? In which moment did I feel and act free from negativity, low and earthly thoughts and emotions? At what point did I feel most alive and most in sync with God?
Okay,
And
so
I
note.
think this question is so hard, because if I wasn't ready to think about it, I would look back on the day and be like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. So I kind of like your idea of doing it once at the beginning of the day and once at the end of the day. And maybe the beginning is just knowing what you're going to need to reflect on at the end of the day, so we pay closer attention.
Yeah, and so also note, I think you're absolutely right. Also notice that this is both. This has gone back to the second phase. This has gone back to review the day, because We reviewed the negative part of the day. Now we're reviewing a positive part of the day. See, and that's what I mean by it just kind of expands it out. It wasn't like we were done with the first 4 steps. It's just that's the way the app takes us through it. So it's a review. And you're right. I mean, you're not always ready to get this sort of explicit. So again, we swipe to the left, and now we're going to picture the day with God again. So this is this is actually the 4th phase, looking for help in this regard. Number 6 here on the positive end. Now I'm going to imagine God with myself watching this grace-filled moment. We replay the moment in prayer. I observe not only what happened, but also what was going on in my heart. So again, this is looking for the way God is present, both in the bad stuff of life and in the positive stuff of life. And I think all of us often struggle with that. We always just want to look for God in the good stuff and acknowledge that God was there and kind of blame God when the stuff isn't good, right? But this is just owning that God is there in both. And I love it. It's very helpful, this app. Then you swipe again to the left, and we're in screen 7. Now God and I look to tomorrow. So this is looking for help as well. This is looking now towards what can I do? Where can I find freedom, grace-filled moment? What attitudes and behaviors will I adopt in order to avoid the pit of the unfree moment? And so like a good prayer, this is challenging us both to rely on God and to take our own steps. It's a both and, right? Any good relationship is a both and. If I'm in a dialogue, I'm both listening and speaking. I'm both hearing and responding. And so in this prayer of examen, I'm both relying on God and what God can help me with, but I'm also going, okay, what am I going to do to make tomorrow different? What am I going to do to help my cause, if you will, to be a better Christ follower? Then you swipe again to the left. Screen 8, I make whatever commitments I feel called to make. I ask God for help to keep those commitments. So for instance, if I say I'm going to be more grace-filled and more open to the Spirit, I ask for God, hey, give me strength to do that. God, I'm going to make that commitment. Help me out here. And then finally, the last screen, and we'll close on this. I close by praying the Our Father, which is the Lord's Prayer. That's typically that's what the Catholic Church and sometimes the Episcopal Church calls the Lord's Prayer. So I close with that. And so that's just—
Does it always close with the Lord's Prayer?
No. So each one's different. Again, that's why I love the app, because it's not a succinct format for the prayer of examen, but it gives you all of the components of prayer of examen plus some. I just think— Go ahead.
Oh, and as you know, Daniel mentioned at the very beginning, one of the things that I like, so, as I said, today we're in, am I free or unfree, when we look at the options for the different prayers. So we can go through and choose something that is based on what we're struggling with right now. But also, if you open the app, the very first thing that you're going to see is today's prayer of examen. So you could just open it and do whatever comes up that day as your prayer without having to search for anything at all.
That's right. Yeah. The app is very open to that. So it can be very traditional, and it literally says that, the traditional prayer, or it offers you these other options. I have found it very helpful. I am not currently using the app literally right now, but I use it on and off in my prayer life. So sometimes I'll go a month on and then take a month off. And I just find it a very helpful app, and would strongly encourage you, because in many ways, it's a very open-ended prayer, but it's also a formula prayer. And so depending on what you may need personally, because I know some of us need some kind of guidance, right? And it offers that, but it also offers a kind of open-endedness that you can expend however you want. I just want to challenge us to find ways to prayer. And the examen prayer, I think, is one of the closest ways to Elijah's prayer that he had with that angel that day when he finally heard the small whisper of God. And that's why I love the examen, because I believe that's when we can hear the small whisper of God, is when we're in this fine-tuned relationship through examining our heart and soul through the examen prayer.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for walking us through a new spiritual practice today. And as a reminder to everybody watching, you can catch all previous episodes of Go Beyond. So on Monday, we unpacked the story of Elijah. On Wednesday, we challenged it. And today we learned a spiritual practice based on 1 Kings 17 through 19. And so you can go to tmumc.org/go beyond to see all previous episodes. And I hope that you will join us on Sunday morning. We are going to live stream worship at 9:30 and 11 a.m. And we are going to hear words from Pastor Doug on the story of Esther. And so next week, we're going to be diving into Esther. And y'all know I love those women of the Bible. So it's going to be good.
Absolutely. Let me also put in a plug. We will have Go Beyond this coming Monday, which is Memorial Day, but previous to Go Beyond, we'll also have a live Memorial Day worship service at 9 a.m. on Facebook Live. So be sure to check that out as well.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Have a good weekend.